Kristal DeSantis is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the creator of the strong model of relational therapy. She's also a clinically certified trauma professional, a certified sex therapy informed professional, and is trained in EMDR therapy. With over a decade of experience, Kristal helps individuals and couples navigate the complexities of modern relationships, focused on emotional safety, evolving gender roles, and the challenges of modern masculinity. She is the author of Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man, and is passionate about fostering stronger, more resilient partnerships built on skills and intentionality. All of which sounds incredibly relevant in the current time we're living. So you're very welcome to the Intimacy Inquiry. And thank you so much for finding the time to talk.
Absolutely.
I just wondered if we could start off sharing a bit about what your journey was into becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist. What was it that drew you to relationships, intimacy, and in particular the challenges of how we live in our modern world?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I want to say that my interest in relationships. So originally, I'm in the States now, but I grew up in Japan. And I have, I'm American, my mom is Asian, and so I just kind of always grew up in a cross-cultural household. And just understanding the different relationships between different cultures was just something, that was kind of the waters I swam in growing up, right? It's like, we would hang out with the expats, my dad's friends, and then we'd go to school and be integrated in the local society. And just kind of was something that just made me aware that cultures have different rules for relationships. So I kind of knew that at a really young age. And then when I moved to the US to go to college, when I was 18, I realized that now I'm moving, from the culture I grew up in to very foreign culture. And immediately, of course, going to college, what does everybody talk about? Everybody talks about dating. Everybody talks about relationships. I also ended up going to an all-women's college, Carolina, which has very kind of what's culture, Greek life, right? So fraternities, sororities. And I was just so blown away by all the different mini cultures, even within the U.S. to relationships, right? And so I just loving all of that, right? How do the women in college engage with each other? How do they engage when they date outside of the college? And just kind of me watching all these relationships. And what I realized is, I don't know the rules of this. I don't. I grew up in a different culture. In America is its own animal. And I was just like, I don't know this at all. But I was totally content not participating and simply just observing and listening to my friends' stories. Of course, until I was like, all right, I do want to date, but I still don't know how. And so that to a couple of disastrous dates and disastrous interactions. So then I finally went to marriage and family therapist because I was like, gosh, somebody's got to know how to do this. I don't have time to, I didn't grow up. Is there a way that I can learn the rules of relationships, the rules of dating in this culture? And I just, Google searched and it was like marriage and family therapist. I was like, I guess that's the person I need to talk to. And so I ended up learning a lot about relationships. And I didn't even know that this was a thing. And now I want to do this thing. So yeah, that's how I ended up.
What did you find was the biggest difference between relationships in the US and in Japan? Is the US more informal? Is Japan more formal? Is the US more casual? And Japan's more serious? What would you say the biggest differences?
I think just the American dating culture. I think it's been obviously transmitted through movies and TV and all of that, but that was just not really a thing, right? Dating in school, high school. That's just not. You were in school to be in school to learn, and then after school tutoring to learn more. Of course, there were people had crushes as they do in high school, but dating culture is not really a thing like it is in America. So, I'm curious, what it is like in England, but it was for shock. I was like, oh.
Yeah, gosh, what's it like in England? It's a long time ago for me, but I think we're heavily influenced by American culture. Youngsters in the UK seem to be slightly younger than the equivalent person in the US. So I think we tend to come to things a little. So yeah, so middle school, high school, maybe towards the end. So certainly college, university dating, but it seems to happen a little bit later. I think so in America as well, people get their licenses, the car licenses much earlier.
Absolutely.
And that sounds silly, but that makes a big difference. Once you left college and you're no longer in a sort of single sex environment, is that when the sort of therapy helped then? Help you sort of navigate the dating world?
Well, yeah. I mean, I dating really started taking off too, which was a whole different ball game. And so I always, had friends that are like, you go out and you meet someone and, it's just
Yeah.
right. And so a profile, and that's where I ended up meeting my husband, because she was telling me all about it. Like, this is a great new thing to do. New world for me of, first of all, moving from a different group. I remember when I was in college, a girl that I was coworkers with was telling me about this new guy that she was dating, and she was really into him. And I was like, ooh, who are his parents? And she just looked at me like, what? And so that kind of culture difference that I was like, oh, so I guess you don't ask that because it's not a thing here, And then, then going into online dating of like, what is this? Like, how do you do this? So I just felt like guidance. And so that's when I'm going to therapy and deciding, okay, I'm here to learn and I want to understand. And it was very helpful.
So from going to therapy, thinking, hey, this is quite a good thing, learning lots. When did the pivot come to thinking, hey, maybe I should do this rather than just be a subject? I want to be the teacher. When did that happen?
It was a couple years. So for the first, and I was seeking therapy, was that I met my husband on this dating app, and I realized like, ooh, I really like this guy, but I still don't know how to do relationships. I still don't know what I'm doing. So even when I laugh, I was going to therapy and just learning like how to do this and how to communicate and what attachment styles are, and and then I started on and just being fascinated by it. So I want to say it was probably like year 2 that I then was like, I want to go to school too about this as well. Yeah. And here I am.
Well, absolutely. So from that, you developed your own approach. You created this strong model of relational therapy. Could you tell us about the core principles and what the components are and how that helps with modern relationships?
Absolutely. Yeah, because one thing I guess, as I was becoming a therapist, I was really learning a lot, and I love reading. So that's something, before I became a therapist, I was like, I could work in the library and just read all day. So even though I was schoolwork and all of that, I was still constantly just trying to learn, like, what is the science of relationships? And really one of the things that stood out to me is, of course, attachment theory. Right? It's like just understanding the underpinnings of how we attach to people. And then also at the time, I was, my husband is a veteran. And so I was reading about veterans and their exposure to trauma and PTSD and recovery from that. And these two things there formed the foundation of the STRONG model, which is starting with a trauma-informed attachment-based perspective. Of the 6 pillars of what I've seen, through the research, what makes a relationship healthy? What, everybody was like, I want to back to that classic saying of strong is healthy. And so, no, I wanted to add that.
How do you find that sort of works in practice when you have people that come and talk to you?
I find, because kind of experience of, wanting relationships, but knowing where to start, and kind of being a little trepidatious, like, just go out there, just put yourself out there, just go date, and I'm like, that sounds terrible. I get it wrong. What if I end up in a toxic relationship? What if I end up with, stuck and want to be in? Or what if I just make a fall, right? And so all of these things, it really where's the guide? Like, what, rather than spending, these are the things that make a healthy relationship, where's the blueprint? Where's the map for the average person? And so that's really what prompted me to create this and write my book is, these 6 pillars are very intuitive. Like when I say them to people, everybody's like, oh yeah, yep, you're right. Like, those are definitely the things that I look for in a healthy relationship. But but sometimes it's to kind of put it into words. But what I've found is that when I lay it out, it is very intuitive, and it gives people a sense of, especially like if they're coming to work with me as a therapist, a sense of clarity that, hey, we're not just going to sit here and go over every fight you've ever had, and this is going to be kind of nebulous. One of you is going to cry, or one of you're going to leave mad. It's things that might happen, but here's the blueprint of what we're building toward, right? So that's what, is.
When you, so what, I guess when you think about the average American who's seen the movies, who's been to high school, been to junior high, and sort of, like you say, has sort of dated or gone through that experience without the sort of therapy, etc. Why do you think so many people are in and remain in unhappy relationships?
Honestly, because I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so people are kind of doing trial and error.
Yeah.
And there's so much information out there, right? There's some people, you can obviously go online and find confirmation for literally anything you want, right? You can go in and say, hey, my partner did this, but people can be like, leave him immediately, leave her immediately. Like, this is toxic behavior. Or you can read something else and they could say, well, get this, or why don't you try that? And so there's just a lot of information out there. So, and also, I think that there's conflicting about like, okay, love is not always peaches and cream and roses and happiness all the time. But then also on the other, how hard is it supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where I see a lot of people where they're not happy, but they're not sure if this is like toxic not happy, or if this is just run of the mill, not every moment of life is supposed to be thrilling and exciting, right? So that was also wanted to lay out in the book of like, yeah, you're right. Not every moment of life is supposed to be, thrilling and exciting. Here's how you can tell the difference between like steady, stable, like happiness versus steady, stable stagnation.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't know what things should be like as we talk to somebody. And again, should is a silly word. We don't know what is it normal to have an argument once a month? Is it normal to feel upset once every 6 months? Is it normal to all those things? Well, when you find out actually, well, that's what life is. That hard. You shouldn't be fighting for this every single day. It's, and one of the things you talk about, I don't see a lot of people talk about. So huge kudos to you. Is the challenges around what I guess modern masculinity means these days and what role it has in relationship, because you certainly, with the advent of social media, there are some terrible places that young men, that teenagers go for affirmation of who they are, which makes them very, how do I help my son, 15 years old, how do I help teenagers navigate what they're supposed to be as a modern man?
Yeah, I mean, this is, you're right, it is a problem, and it's becoming a bigger problem, and it's actually happened very rapidly. Honestly, I think we just need to start changing the conversation, which is part of why I'm, really passionate about this, is that, it's not boys versus girls. It's not men versus women. It's not women's rights are at the expense of men's rights. It's not, that I'm going to flip it and men were at the top. Now the goal is that men are at the bottom. And sometimes I think some of miscommunicated, right?
Yeah.
But, like a prologue of my book, it also, I wrote my book, with an interest for men, simply because, one of the things that I noticed, right, as a woman going to an all-women's college is the message for women is you can be anything, right? You can be a wife, you can be a mother, you can be a working mother, you can be a stay-at-home mother, you could be a single mom, you could be a married mom, you could be, you can be anything. But the same message was not being transmitted to men. Working with married couples who are, in their 30s, and they would ask for self-help or, other resources, go and do their own learning. Again, the same thing what I found. Resources for women were all about empowerment, like you can be anything you want, like all of this. And the books for men were still about how can you succeed at business? How can you get more fit? And there just really wasn't an emphasis on internal, mental, emotional wellness, right? And so that's where I saw the manosphere, like masculinity, influencers just kind of rushed in to fill that gap where these young men are wondering, like, what is valuable about me? Am I allowed to be a whole person? Like, where's the affirmation for me? Right? Like, my sister is maybe getting the message that, like, hey, you can be anything. You can be an astronaut. You could be, you could be young boys. Where's the message for, the same equivalent for them? You could be a teacher. You could be a social worker. You could be the president. You could be a father. You could be a stay-at-home father. You could be a working parent. You could go live in a, world. And so then these and they just double down on the mess of men have to create their own worth by either becoming really fit or becoming really rich. And it's the same old taught for generations, but now it's been weaponized against young men, right? Anyways, I could go on about
it. It needs to be, most social media need to be rich or ripped, really. So if you're, spending lots of time in the gym, and you might be, well, we've seen an increase in men having cosmetic procedures. There's the sort of women with all the fashion magazines and all those sort of things, and it's very challenging about how thin you should be and how you should look. And it's the same for men now. On the front cover of every sort of magazine is a sort of Adonis type man, which is not achievable for most of us. So it's hard. I mean, my daughter goes to a daughter school, an all-girls school, son goes to a boys' school. Both of them are fabulous schools. But my daughter's school, the messaging is very, very much exactly as you said. You can be whatever you want. There's no barriers. And it's a wonderful message. And my son's school is very, very good, but still 90% of the boys there will go on and do maths or science or economics or hard metrics. And it is about, business and being successful. Still, if you ask most teenage boys, what does success look like? You probably wouldn't get that many saying, oh, it would be amazing to be a stay-at-home dad. And I hope one day we'll get to that point. But it must be very hard to navigate what the world looks like now. As you said, when you're being bombarded by so many different messages, and you're not sure.
Sure. And I will say that, the messaging for women is only very recently been, I mean, obviously the feminist revolution started a long time ago, but I mean, even looking back into the early 2000s of like the body image messaging, the rate of eating young women and the body shame. And it's just like all of women have finally said, hey, actually, we don't want to believe that. Like, we don't want to buy that. And, shame has been used to control us for so long that we don't want to do that. And unfortunately, that message is now over to young boys. Right? I'm seeing a rise in eating disorders among young men, body dysmorphia, anxiety, all the same things that the young girls were being subjected to, right? Is all of that messaging is now just being transferred to young men, right? Like, you look like crap, you're not good enough, you're not tall enough, you're not, smart enough, and all these things. And again, the same message. And so this is part of where, I guess I do want to send a message of hope, is that like we've seen this before.
Yeah.
The same message has been used to like make money off of and manipulate young women, right? That was always a message, right? You're not thin enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not sexy enough, you're not whatever enough. And that's not true. Right? And of course, it's still an ongoing fight and there's still all of that. But I do have a lot of hope that we can do the same thing for young men. It's like, hey, you don't have to believe that. Your value is not tied to your physical appearance. Because anyway, relationships, not just with yourself, but also with your community, with your your intimate relation, right? Because, as we know, internal shame is such a corrosive, right?
It is.
And you can't be in a relationship. You can't show up for your partner fully if you are drowning in shame, right?
And I think one of the big things that's changed in the last, I'm not sure, 15, 20 years, I guess, is just the sheer volume of information. I'm not saying knowledge of information and access to information. If you think about pornography as an example, there used to be a magazine on a bookshelf, and that literally was it. And it was a picture of a woman with no clothes on, typically. That isn't what pornography is now. And I think the average age boys see porn is 12 or 13. There's no way somebody understands what a relationship should be. And I think when I see some of the things that people have seen, I guess expectations about what sex is, how people should look, how you as a man should perform, what you should expect as a response, it's pretty hard because you're watching it and you're seeing more and more your friends are seeing it. I think, well, this is what it is. This is what sex is. Because most parents don't have that very, very detailed conversation with the children. Most schools aren't equipped to have that conversation. So people go looking for information where they can find it. I talked to an adult content creator a few years ago, an actress, and she was fabulous. And she was saying, look, porn for us is entertainment, and I would hate to think people use it for education, which I think is really correct. But it's very hard to tell teenage boys that just don't look at that, it's not going to help you. Because
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the challenges. There's so much that comes, it's like a fire hose that comes at you. How do you sort of filter and pick out the things that are accurate and that are useful, I suppose?
Absolutely, especially since there is still such, shame and stigma around talking about sex in a healthy way. So thing that I see is parents not having another way to talk about it. And so, again, around talking about it or dealing with it themselves, so then they cannot have the healthy conversation with their children about, hey, this is not real, this is not healthy, because again, it might even almost be that denial that their child is at the age where they're looking at it, right? They're like, oh, they're so uncomfortable. Their child is, experiencing this, that they just, would rather not talk about it, which is a huge disservice. You're exactly right. I mean, young men in their earlies who, maybe they've never had a physical experience with a woman, but they've watched thousands of hours of porn, and so that's also leading to body image issues, anxiety, erectile dysfunction, performance anxiety, because they are again, because they didn't get anything else. They didn't get the healthy, talk from somebody else to say like, hey, no, that's like, and sometimes by, watching, or something.
It is.
It's like, you're not going to learn, by watching something overproduced like that. Right. But again, like, and down and teach you to drive, in a healthy kind of are open to question, then yeah, you will learn to drive by watching Fast and the Furious, because look, there's 8 movies of that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
It does seem to be one of the few things that we still find uncomfortable to talk about. Intimacy, sex, sexuality, etc. And yet it is literally the thing that drives the human race. Without that, there would be no human race. It's extraordinary. We'll talk about death, we'll talk about finances even, but yeah, when it comes to that discussion, it's not something I know men don't talk about it in groups. I'm not sure if women do. We just don't really. We just don't have those conversations. I think we need to get past the thought of it being embarrassing, because it's not. Because I think, and hopefully you'll agree, I think one of the key things in a healthy or happy relationship must be the ability to communicate.
Absolutely.
It's really easy, but it's sometimes not easy.
No.
You date and then you might get into a relationship. It might be 1 year, 10 years, 15 years, and you're in you have a routine, you have children, you have pets, you have whatever. And you don't sometimes sit down and say, let's talk for an hour. Even to find that you enjoyed, it will change.
Absolutely.
So I do think that. So how do you help people when they come to you and you know that the big challenge is that they're just not, they might think they're talking, but they're not communicating? How do you help people with that?
Yeah, so that's kind of where, I have my strong model, because it does start with establishing safety, right? So the S in the strong model is safety. And so I break safety down into 4 different components, because, it's such a big word. But the first piece, right? And so just really understanding, do you even know what your needs are when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to physical affection, when it comes to, what you're looking for? Can you even articulate that, right? Because that's often a piece that I'm like, well, you can't tell your partner what you don't know. And so often I see people just kind of reacting to like, no, I don't like that, or no, I don't want that. And I'm like, well, what do you want? Right? And sometimes they can't even articulate it because they haven't sat down and said, actually, wait, great question. What do I want? Right? And so the self-awareness starts with that internal safety of, okay, I know what I want. I know how to ask for it. And I know why I want it. I know it's important to me. So that if my partner asks, like, hey, why is this so important to you? I can tell them. Right? I can tell them who I am. And then the second about basic stability, right? And that actually does impact a sex life very much, because our bodies, physiologically, when we're in a state of chaos, we go into a state of protection, right? And so if our homes are chaotic, if our lives are chaotic, if we're stressed out, our bodies are not shifting into relax mode, right? We don't shift into connection mode when our environments are, because it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are still animals, and our animal nature is like, if things are chaotic, we close up, we get self-protective, right? And so in order to be in a state of connection, there has to be a level of stability to the environment, which, some stress management stuff, there might be some basic stability needs in your home, right? Like if babies are screaming and dinner isn't done and washing isn't done, and like that's also where I also talk to couples about, look, it's not just a manipulation to try to get you to do the dishes. There is real physiological science here about how chaos prevents intimacy, because it puts your body in a state of protection, not a state of connection, right? Safety, I call, is it's kind of the conflict and connection pieces of safety, which is self-regulation and then self-expression, right? So do you know how to have even a disagreement in a way that is regulated, right? So safe disagreements is really crucial to create emotional safety in a relationship, right? And then the last piece, which is the self-expression, is, sometimes, especially when I talk to men, is they just didn't get the vocabulary to talk about emotions in the same way that sometimes their partners did, right? And so, when their partners try, like, talk to me, I need to understand you, like, why are you shutting down? It feels like they're being criticized, it feels like an attack, and sometimes their partner is asking for something that they literally just don't have, right? I don't have the words to tell you how I'm feeling. And so that's the other piece, is like that can feel like emotionally unsafe for a partner if they're trying to connect with you on a level that you can't even get to, right? And so these kind of pieces of safety is where I start with couples, is let's make sure you know how to regulate your body. First of all, let's make sure your environment is conducive to intimacy. And then let's make sure that you have the physical and verbal ability to meet each other where you want to be. Right? Because that then sets up a level of safety in the relationship that can then kind of build on, like, that you can build on, right? Because then if I go through the acronym real quick, the T is then trust, right? And a lot of couples therapy, at least what I found, it really is about trust. People have broken trust, they rebuild trust, all of that. But what I found, going deeper into trauma work and attachment work, is we do not trust people we don't feel safe with. It's just fundamental. Again, like, we can work on trust building exercise all day. If we don't feel safe with our partner, it's always going to be one of those of like, it works for 2 months, fall back. It works for 3 weeks, and then we fall back. And we don't know why, because we're doing the exercises. Like, but we haven't addressed the safety first. Because once safety is there, then building trust, then those exercises actually stick, right? And then the R is respect, which at the end of the day, right, mutual respect in a relationship, regardless of, again, gender roles, feeling like each respected for who they are and what they bring to the relationship is so crucial. And that really just prevents any kind of power struggles, right? Because this is often what I see with people that, especially what I've heard from men, right, is that they're like, I need to feel respected in my home. And sometimes if they don't, what ends up happening is then they try to assert their power to demand respect, right? And so that's also a really crucial, which then damages the safety, damages the trust, right? And so really just kind of working through, like, when you're a safe person and you're trustworthy, then you automatically kind of command respect. And then all we need to talk about is negotiating boundaries when it comes to respect, right? And again, this is a message that men often don't get. Women get the message, like, you're allowed to have your own boundaries, you're allowed to be in charge of your body, your needs matter. And often what I see is that they're not getting the same message. So I see a lot of men who end up feeling like it's their job to respect their wives' boundaries, it's their job to meet his needs. And then they kind of just seethe in resentment until they explode, because they're like, what about my boundaries? What about my needs? It's like, well, yeah, you actually matter too. So let's make sure that, again, you can also state your needs in a way that also doesn't is autonomy. You're allowed to have your autonomy, but let's make sure that this relationship is big enough for both of you to feel respected in your own way, right? And so the ST of my strong model is really about the survival skills for a relationship, right? So whenever I see a couple come in and they're in crisis all the time, they just don't, they're walking on eggshells, or there's always these little, friction happening, I always work on the STR, because those are survival skills. If you don't have safety, you don't have a trust, and you don't have respect, that's just going to be a really stressful relationship, right? It's going to struggle to survive. And then, but I also see couples that come in where they're like, we love each other, we have a very safe, we have a trusting, we have a respectful relationship. Now we want to take it to the next level, right? Now we want to explore maybe, doing more things sexually. We want to deepen our intimacy, or, our kids are not out of the house, transition into our empty nest phase. Yeah. How do we bring the spark? And so that's really the ONG part of the relationship, which is openness, nurture, and generosity, right? It's like, we got to start the basic survival to get through those. Then how do we stay open? Mm-hmm. How do we stay open with communicating about our changes? Like you said, the people that met and fell in love when you were 20 are not going to be the same people that you retire with, right? Yeah. How do you stay open about it? How do you communicate about that? And then nurturing, right? Again, what does nurturing your best life look like in this chapter? Right? And there's lots of mini stages of that throughout life, and being able to say, like, you're not sacrificing anything by being in a relationship, kind of the old model of like, the old ball and chain. Oh, I could do that, but I got to check with the wife, right? Or the husband, right? It's like, in an ideal relationship, it's like we feel nurtured by our partners, right? We are better together. We have somebody who cares about us being our best selves. And then the G of generosity is really just kind of that fairy dust, I call, of the relationship of, the science of generosity is really kind of that last little bit of what keeps a relationship feeling good and kind of in love over the course of a lifetime. People look for ways to make their partner's day just a little bit better. Right, it's kind of that love languages. Yeah. I mean, there's all, filling the love tank. It's saying like, I feel safe with you. I trust you. I feel respected by you. We can be open with each other. I feel nurtured by you. So then I'm just like naturally wanting to be generous. How can I make you thrive? What do you need today? There might be that little extra, little extra kiss, little extra words of affirmation. But all of that then is what keeps the relationship thriving. Yeah. So when I seek to work through them, work through it wherever they're at in their relationship. But yeah.
That was an awesome answer. And it's not asking for free therapy now, but that's the stage we're in. So with an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old coming up to empty nesting. And I think maybe it's changed now probably, but I think the sort of guidance that I felt we had when we had children was that children come first. It's all about the children, and children come first. And the relationship or the partner is very much secondary. 18 years later, looking across now. Right, there's no children to ferry to a party or to swimming or to some gala or whatever, or to prom. And it's like, it's just the two of us now. And you almost need to start dating again. But I think that's probably a really good conversation with a therapist. Not because anything's necessarily wrong, but just to say, look, we've had these 25 years, whatever, it's been wonderful. We've got children there doing their thing, which is, where do we go? We haven't talked about ourselves, the two of us. It's for the children, really. That's really big, isn't it?
Yeah, it is huge because, really, it's an identity shift.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like going from being mom and dad to now just being, Bob and Susan again. And you're like, oh, this is weird, right? Which unfortunately, because saying, and this is part of what I talk about in, how the modern relationship is shifting, is, you're exactly right, is especially, both men and women, but getting the message as a man that your job is to provide for your family, right? You need to keep a roof over your children's head. Like maybe your wife is the one that ferries them back and forth to school, and your job as a man is to be the provider, right? So you better have a good job. You better pay those bills. Yeah. And often, so this we see with men is, when either the kids leave home, right? And then their wives are like, all right, I'm out. Thanks. Good to know you. Right?
Yeah.
Because they're really emphasis on the couple. And so, if it's, and I talk about it in my book of like, there are function-based relationships and connection-based relationships. And relationships that are based on function, the relationship ends when the function does. And honestly, this is also borne out by a lot of research, is there's a rise in what's called gray divorces of people over the age of 55.
Yeah.
Their divorce rates are skyrocketing because their functions are over, right? It's like, okay, the kids are gone. And then individually, it's, the first year after retirement, the death rate of a man just skyrockets. Right? Again, it's that identity shift of you've been told your whole life that your value was in your paycheck.
Yeah.
And now that you are now retired, and if you haven't cultivated that sense of, well, who else am I? Honestly, that's where a lot of men just...
I guess as a man, you've always strived to have a purpose. Purpose. And if your purpose is to put money on the table, put food on the table, whatever, or your purpose is to do, but suddenly, like you said, suddenly the children have gone left home, you've retired, so your purpose as a father that's raising children as opposed to sort of being an adult-to-adult relationship, suddenly it's gone. And if you haven't cultivated other things or other parts of your life, then suddenly you sort of sit there and think, what's my point? What is my purpose?
Exactly.
And that's I can imagine that you can get frustrated when you look at your partner and think, well, you've got a purpose, your friends, you go out and do this, and I've been at work and I've been doing this, but again, it's that communication thing, isn't it? At least if you can talk,
exactly.
you split it down into you don't have the safety and the trust and the respect. You can forget about it. You can't leap to them. You can't say, right, what are we going to do when you haven't got that? Trust.
Exactly.
So that's super important. Because if you want to talk about things, how they might be different, especially as a man, if you've been taught that you should be the more dominant partner and you want to be more submissive, and you want to be able to know that your partner's not going to either run away crying or run away laughing. You want to have a respectful, trusting conversation. Now, I like the way you structure it in terms of you've got to have those fundamentals. Where do you go?
Where, I very much put in a lot of research in my book and a lot of references, because if you go online, like pop psychology, it's so easy to hear too much about the generosity piece, especially for young men, right? It's like the message is, get really rich, then you can buy your woman a bunch of gifts, and that's what keeps her sticking around. And then they get confused, right? Because I've seen this with young men where they're like, well, I showed up and I bought, her a fancy dinner, and they turned me down, and I don't get it. Like, what am I missing? And like, these women are just so entitled, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're starting from the wrong end. But again, the message of creating internal safety, there's no money in that, right? And so this is also dangerous, because a lot of the social media and the pop psychology is really, it does start kind of from the wrong end of like, be generous, give your partner gifts, make sure they have a, cush life. But it doesn't say anything about, no, you matter as a human, and your safety also matters as like, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of relationship do you want to be in? Can you articulate need from your partner? Because your needs matter too. And so the cherry on the top, it is not the meat and potatoes. Meat and potatoes are at the other end.
What generosity is, really, isn't it? If one of you comes home and the other one's cooked dinner as a surprise, one of you comes home and the other one's run a bath, whatever, it doesn't need to be rocking up in the Lamborghini with the 100 red roses.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if, back to your analogy about learning from Fast and Furious. So when we do learn to drive, we study a little bit and figure out what each part of the car does. We have lessons, etc. So for people that are perhaps, how can they take steps to prepare so when they go into a relationship, it's more likely to be one that they're comfortable with?
A big part that I also think gets missed is, your sexuality is your own, right? And so get to know your own body, get to love your own body, right? It's like, especially with, I've, seen this with men, is it's almost like they have this performance mindset, right? Is that my body is supposed to perform in a certain way that it gives my partner a half a dozen orgasms, right? And so really just getting to know, like, what is it that you enjoy when it comes to sex? And again, not every man is the same. All these myths about like, a man is just like a wallet with a penis attached, and that's what your value is, and that's what women want. And so really, I think it's getting to know, like, what is it that's pleasurable for you? right? Are you the, and again, consent goes both ways. I've had to talk to men about this, of like, you also deserve consent, right? If you're also allowed to say no. If somebody's pushing your boundaries and wanting something from you, like, and so I think just we need a lot more of those conversations, especially when it comes to, thankfully a lot of young women, are more aware of those conversations. But with young men, like we're still dropping the ball a little bit on that, right? Of, like what if, I've seen so many men, they don't really they can't really articulate what is a pleasurable sexual experience outside of, well, it's if I orgasm.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, again, sex is so much more than that. Same thing with intimacy. I've heard from a lot of young, they are afraid that like, well, I want to talk to my partner, but girls get the ick, right? If a man's too emotional, or all this idea of like intimacy in a man is not attractive, and that women only want men to show up in a certain way. And I think we just need to do a bit of having these conversations and expanding the conversation around, what is filling, pleasurable, whole relationship. What does that actually look like? Right?
I think it's absolutely. And I talked to a somatic therapist a few months ago. And we she was sort of saying, which is very, very true. I think when we're going through puberty and we start having sexual feelings around bodies, we might be sort of desired, want to masturbate, whether you're male or female. Certainly as a man, that tends to be a very, very rushed and hurried experience. But you never actually go on from that and sort of just spend an hour by yourself just exploring your body and knowing that your elbows are sensitive, or your earlobes, or whatever. We sort of jump to, you have that, and then you have a relationship, and you sort of know. So I sort of forget as adults how pleasurable it can be just kissing somebody for 10 minutes. we sort of see it as like, that's the challenge, I guess, is that we maybe adults and younger people, we see sex as a typically penetrative act. Whereas the whole gamut of what sex and intimacy is doesn't need to include that. So many men still believe that their partner 100% orgasm through penetration. It isn't my partner, it's orgasm. And it's all the data, all the research shows that isn't true. From a physiological perspective, it's not how good you are in bed, it's just literally physiologically your partner isn't going to orgasm that way. So pleasure comes in, and that's the thing, is how do we help people explore to explore joy that isn't just, right now we've got to have sex. Talk about it when you're younger. Have you had sex with her? Did you do it with her? The thing is the goal. Hopefully that sort of changes over time as we talk about it more comfortably.
You said changing the language for both men and women. Sex is a shared experience. It's not something one person does to another.
Yeah.
Need a lot of evolution, I think, comes to talking about. I use a lot of the Nagoski. She talks about the difference between responsive and spontaneous desire. And really, again, pleasure is the measure of a successful intimate interaction, right? It's not orgasms, it's not penetration, it's not, speed, it's not performance. It's pleasure. You both enjoy it? Did you feel more connected?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it brought you closer together, either emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically, right? It's like, did you have fun? Ultimately, like, sex is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be stressful. It's not supposed to be painful. It's not supposed to be performance oriented. It's supposed to be fun, right? And I think sometimes we've just, again, with our society, with all of these things, it's like we've lost sight of that. And so just bringing sex of like, are you having fun?
Yeah. It's funny when we talked before about about sometimes the sort of chaos in the home, and the dishes aren't done, and the beds aren't made, whatever. It's funny, isn't it? It's because a lot of time we tend to have the most pleasure when we go away on vacation.
Absolutely.
We pack everything out, we got 2 cases, and you're in a hotel room, a normal room. There's no worry about the roof that's been dripping over the door. And then we come back and all that pressure piles upon us again. But you're the same 2 people, I guess, in a different mindset, aren't you? Suddenly your shoulders drop a little bit, look around, it's a different room, and whatever goes. Yeah.
Else as well that I tell couples a lot is, I think, close together, right? So I think that's something else, is like you said, when we have this very distinct, like you're either on vacation or you're working, right? You're either in your life and you're struggling, or you're on vacation. And so that's something else of looking for little moments where you can have play with your partner, do something pleasurable, enjoyable, just have fun, have more fun together. I've seen so many couples, unfortunately, where they're like, gosh, when is the last time we had fun together? And so then you're like, well, no wonder your sex life is not thriving. It's, you're not even experiencing each other as a conduit of fun right now. You see your partner, you see their name pop up on your phone, and you're like, oh Christ, what is this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you, not sexually, but what do you do for fun then? So you talk to a lot of people. I'm sure you come across some quite stressful situations. So how do you keep yourself mentally and physically able to give yourself to people in that way?
I'm a therapist. I do my own. I also make. I do have a lot of. I read for a lot of social events too for fun. I like to do a lot of things that are a novel. So that self in that growth and open set. So I'll thing that I see. I will drive it. Drive in to the store. Just keep connected to my community, to myself, to my body. I love, Austin is a beautiful city. It gets too hot. I love getting out in nature, hiking. I sometimes do some classes, and just, is the key, keeping me feeling good.
Just one final question. You've been super generous with your time. So are you the sort of person that has a 5-year plan? Do you know what your future holds, or are you we'll see what happens? What does your future hold, do you think?
I'm right now kind of in a transition phase. So I think I'm mapping that out.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, writing big accomplishment for me that really kind of took me. And then I also ran a group practice. So actually the beginning of this year, for the year was just restoration. Right, so I'm kind of like coming back into restoring myself so that I can launch into my next practice or my next venture, whatever it is. But I'm kind of in cocoon for this year.
Did writing the book put you off ever writing a book again, or do you think,
no, I actually for women next time, right? Because this one, it's relational in general, but I really wrote it for men, and I do think that men to have the space to be different. I think women are going to play a big part of that, right?
Absolutely.
And it's so yeah, maybe my next book will be for women.
Thank you so much for your time. You've been incredibly informative, open. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.